BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
This week we read John chapter 18, verses 12 through 27, the story of Jesus being taken into custody by the religious authorities. We try to climb into the character of Paul, the one disciple who defends Jesus with the sword, one of only two who chooses to follow him into the next dangerous place, who then unravels before our eyes in his loyalty and denies him. We think about this in light of Jesus' attempt to send the disciples home once he has been arrested, Jesus' recognition that humans won't have the strength to be with him as his story unfolds. We reflect on how both of our faiths, Jewish and Christian, are built with the understanding that humans can strive and have the very best of intentions, and we will still have gaps where we will need grace and forgiveness. It is a wretching thing to fall into the gaps. Thanks for being with us. Hey, Bobby, how are you?
Hey, Amy, I'm doing great. How are you this week?
I'm pretty good. I'm especially glad to have an a Christian, not just interfaith, Christian conversation partner this morning because my children asked a question last night that I could not answer, and my lapsed Episcopal husband also could not answer. And the question is this. Are you ready?
Yeah.
They are aware of Ash Wednesday, and they are aware of Lent.
Okay.
And they are aware that people often give something up for Lent.
Yeah.
But they asked, does Lent map onto the story of Jesus's life in some way? Because a lot of the not always, but often these periods of time on the Jewish calendar, we're remembering the years in the desert or it maps onto the story. So does it map? Or is that
That's
not
such
how
an interesting question, and it's a timely question for this week too, because we're well into the season of Lent by now, but we are actually in the narrative lectionary. In past years, we've sort of felt like we had to do a Good Friday episode, or else we wouldn't talk about the crucifixion at all. Like we would just jump from the Last Supper to the resurrection. Yeah. And this cycle of the narrative lectionary, we're actually going to spend looks like 4 weeks in a special episode, Good Friday, talking about the events immediately leading up to Jesus's crucifixion. And so as we prepare for Easter, which is what Lent is kind of doing, that's also what the text is doing. So I love that question, and I love asking it today. I mean, the short answer is that, what Lent is doing is it's anticipating the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. So it's big picture, a way of Christians preparing ourselves. So we don't just live our lives and then it's Easter, yay. But so we sort of experience the difficulty, the deprivation, the challenge, live in the deathliness, I guess, of the world before we then turn to the resurrection on Easter Sunday. In terms of mapping on to Jesus's life, Lent is 40 days minus Sundays. And so once you put it in those terms...
you get a little break. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and there's a debate amongst us about whether Sundays are if you have taken on a Lenten practice, are you relieved of that practice on Sundays or are you not? So the 40 days, the thing that it maps onto most clearly is actually at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry in the other Gospels is the 40 days that Jesus spends in the wilderness being tempted by Satan, which in turn maps onto the 40 years in the wilderness and the Pentateuch, where Israel wanders in the desert, and the sort of the trials of desert life. And chronologically, that experience isn't anywhere close to the Easter experience in terms of the narrative. But this sort of the idea then is if Jesus went through those challenges and was tempted by the things of the world, then here's where we give up something that, is a challenge for us to give up, something that calls us into the world instead of into the way of Jesus. And we give that up and we experience what that's like to have to live without it. And it sort of prepares us for the crucifixion, resurrection story.
Very interesting. Now, when you said, it doesn't chronologically, it doesn't come right before the crucifixion, it had me thinking about the teaching that there's no before and after in the Torah. Like there's no, we read it as a chronological thing, but a lot of religious folk, when they read the story, like any text can talk to anything. Like there's no, you're not beholden to some kind of timeline. So that's a cool thing a cool lens to use for the Lenten time also.
Yeah, I think that's right. And honestly, that's one of the things that I've loved about doing this podcast and doing this podcast with you is when you're spending every week in all of these texts. And the narrative lectionary in its own way has connected texts together for us. But you can start to hear all of these conversations across the text with texts that don't directly have anything to do with each other. But you can start to and then scripture becomes like this beautiful kind of tapestry of interwoven stories. Really is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And a lot of us, if you just listen to 20 verses of scripture read every Sunday, you miss out on a lot of that. But when you linger over the text for a while, as we do week to week, you start to inhabit that kind of in your own life. Well,
let's inhabit a text today, Bobby.
Let's do it.
I'm a little scared to inhabit some of the texts we have coming up in the next several weeks, but that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so we are reading today John chapter 18, verses 12 through 27. We last read from John chapter 13.
Right.
So, and I think you told us last time that it was what was the name for this group of texts?
It's often called the farewell discourse.
Yeah. So we've missed a lot of farewell discourse, comparatively speaking. Obviously, this is not, an advanced course in John, but what do you think we need to know to move forward with today's text?
Yeah, I mean, the farewell discourse is such a lovely text. And, it's Jesus talks from where we were last time in chapter 13 all the way through the end of chapter 17. It's the last night of his life. He's explaining to his disciples everything they need to know to live when he's gone. Jesus knows it's the last night of his life. So if you just imagine that scenario, Jesus trying to explain, okay, y'all, here's everything, everything you need to know. And so it's a beautiful, fascinating, and complicated text. I think probably what I would say in terms of getting us ready for this text is it's worth going back and reading, but you don't actually need it in order to get where we're going today. So you can logically go from the washing of the feet at the Last Supper in John 13 into John 18, and you don't really miss, you can make sense of this text. You miss a lot of interesting theological material.
But not like plot.
Right.
So much. Yeah,
that's one of the places where we struggle with this tension of like, is what we're doing trying to do a podcast on the Gospel of John? Or is what we're doing trying to do a podcast on the narrative lectionary, which is in the Gospel of John? And I think we try to do the second one of those most of the time. So there's a lot to John that we're not actually going to get to talk about.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful context. And, when we pick up in verse 12, at least in my translation, the first word is so. So this is what happened. So there must be something before that. Can you catch us up, at least in terms of the scene, set the scene for us in chapter 18?
Yeah, the farewell discourse itself actually ends in 1726.
Oh.
18:1 says after he said these things, and now we're back in the narrative.
Got it.
Basically, if you remember what has happened in the text we read last time is that Judas, one of Jesus' disciples, had it put in his heart by Satan, however you want to read and understand that he was going to betray Jesus. At the end of the farewell discourse, Jesus then takes his disciples into the garden, which in other Gospels is called the Garden of Gethsemane, although we don't get that name here. And Judas then brings Roman soldiers to the garden in order to arrest Jesus. And that's his act of betrayal. Exactly in what way he betrays him he reveals the secret place where Jesus and his disciples get together, maybe. There's also this kind of stark depiction of the disciples are all gathered together and the soldiers are all gathered together. And it says Judas was with the soldiers. And so there's this like, whose side are you on? There's a very clear demarcation here that Judas is no longer on Jesus's side. When the soldiers try to arrest Jesus in this gospel, Jesus is actually very forthright. Are you Jesus?
Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
Yep.
He is not trying to pretend. Yeah. When the soldiers actually try to arrest him, then Peter takes his sword and cuts off the ear of one of the slaves that has come along, whose name is Malchus in the Gospel of John.
And then Jesus says, "Put away your sword."
Yes.
And this line that's really, I wish this were in the lectionary, but it's not, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but says, "Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given to me?" Like, you cannot prevent this from happening because this needs to happen.
Yeah. And so, yes, here in this gospel, Jesus is very much, in other gospels, Jesus prays that the cup might be taken from him. Here, Jesus just says, I've got to drink this cup. And so anything you do, including violent resistance to the arrest that's taking place, this is not in keeping with the plan. So put that sword away, and we've got to do this. We've got to do this thing.
Yeah. So many questions about that, but that is not in the narrative lectionary. So I'm going to hold my tongue, Bobby, for once in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that sets us up for what we need to know beginning today's reading.
Wait, there's one more thing that I think is relevant here that I forgot to say, is that I said there was Roman soldiers, which is true. It is also some of the Pharisees and Jewish leaders. So there's like this interesting moment where it's both the Roman Empire and the leaders of the Jewish people who are together over and against Jesus here in this scene and in the scenes to come. And that combination, I don't know quite what we're going to end up doing with it, but that Jesus is opposed by both of these groups is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Both of these power structures are against whatever Jesus is trying to do. Yeah. Okay, so I'm reading from the NRSV, and I'm picking up in John chapter 18, verse 12. So the soldiers, their officer, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they took him to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Okay, no, there was only 2 verses, but I just want to pause for a minute there to make sure we understand where we're at. So they took him to the father-in-law of the high priest?
Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's a curious detail in the Gospel of John. It actually seems to reflect the historical circumstance in a really interesting way. Josephus tells us in the Jewish War, one of his important books, Josephus, as you well know, the first century Jewish historian who wrote histories of the Jews, that there was a high priest whose name was Annas. I say Annas because I'm from Arkansas, but your pronunciation is better to the original. And that he was a high priest, and that when his time was up, and whether it was that his term expired or whether he was removed from office by the Romans, it's a matter of some question. But he also had 5 relatives who then became high priest after him. And so there's this sort of dynastic high priesthood that's taking place here. And it's sort of this interesting moment where Caiaphas is really the high priest, but they go to Annas and ask him. And so you kind of get this like power behind the power, like the puppet master behind the puppet. Oh,
interesting. Is it like a puppet priesthood?
Yeah. So the real power is still held by the father-in-law, but the one on the actual, who is performing the actual duties of the high priest officially is the son-in-law Caiaphas.
Very interesting. I'd imagine if you're the high priest, you're pretty busy, high priesting. No time for this nonsense.
I mean, that could be true. Yeah, that could be true.
I don't know. I am really struck by verse 14, this note that Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that
Yeah.
it was better to have one person die for the people.
Yeah.
What? And this is referring back to something that was said in chapter 11, verse 50.
Yeah.
What do you think he is saying here? I feel like I see this shooting meaning out in two different directions, which I trust is actually happening because John likes to do that, but maybe it's just my crazy brain. What do you think what do you think he's saying?
So the little text that you're talking about is in 11:47 to 53,
Mm-hmm.
and it comes right after Jesus has resurrected Lazarus.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we've seen that Jesus has power over death and he can bring life. Like, it's this really interesting detail in the Gospel of John. The priests then in verse 48 say, if we just let this thing go, everybody's going to believe in him, and then the Romans are going to come and destroy our temple.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting detail in this text because it gives you a sense of the situation that the chief priests and the Pharisees are in, where they're caught between the Roman Empire, who supports their leadership, but only as long as it goes well for the Romans, and the traditions of the people, which they're trying to protect. And so they're saying, if the people start to follow Jesus and this thing gets out of hand, then the Romans are going to destroy everything that we believe in. And so we need to do something that's going to protect our traditions from this imperial aggressor.
Right.
So you get this more complicated, like sometimes it's just like the Jews and their leaders were in cahoots with the Romans over and against Jesus. But that's not all the way it's framed here. It's framed as they're trying to protect their traditions against the Romans who are willing to destroy them if things go wrong. And this is where their hand kind of gets forced to do something. And so Caiaphas has said it's better that one man die rather than the whole nation be destroyed. What he's saying is we need to kill Jesus so that the people don't follow him, and then the Romans come and destroy everything.
Right, because following him would be the downfall of our nation. That's
right, yeah. And I mean, you see that play out just a few years later in the Jewish rebellion in 66, where this kind of nationalist movement arises. There's tension between the Jews and the Romans. The Romans come and destroy the temple. Like, what they're saying here is
it's not a crazy
true.
fear. Yeah, it's not a crazy fear.
Interestingly, Caiaphas kind of accidentally prophesies what's true, right? It's better that one man should die for the people.
That's what I was noticing, yes, is in that context in 11, that's how I understood what was happening. There was a fear that Jesus was going to lead them down a road that would lead to their destruction.
Yes.
And so they're protecting the people and saying, the only way we know to protect the people is to have this one man killed.
Yes.
And while killing someone is a rather serious thing to do in the Jewish tradition, if they believe that it is going to save the lives of all these other people, then, they have determined it makes sense. But you're exactly right. When they put it in this context, it's sort of like, well, that actually is the whole plan. That's God's plan.
Yeah.
Right? One person die for the people. That's the plan.
Yeah. That's beautiful Johannine irony. Like, we've seen this all the way through. Characters say things that work on different levels. Caiaphas thinks he's saying one thing. John is saying, yep, you're right, but it means exactly the opposite of what you thought.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Beautiful, John. Okay. So the plot thickens, Bobby, starting in verse 15. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of the man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them and warming himself. I just feel like I need to underscore something again from the beginning of this chapter that we didn't read, but once Jesus has clearly identified himself, and it's clear that the soldiers and police have come for Jesus, he says, let the disciples go. Let the other people go.
Yes.
And it appears that most of them went or did not follow when Jesus was removed from the scene. It's only Simon Peter and this other very awkwardly unnamed disciple
Yeah.
who take it upon themselves to follow Jesus.
Yeah, that's a really important observation, Amy, and one that I think I was going to gloss over. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And in that verse where Jesus does that, he says John says this was so that the word he had spoken might be fulfilled. I didn't lose any of those whom you gave me. And so Jesus letting the ones go keeps them out of danger, which, now we're back in the Good Shepherd text and thinking about what does the shepherd do to protect his flock. I love your point there that these two disciples, Peter being one of them, kind of they do something pretty brave, really, where they follow Jesus. Peter gets a hard
I'm
reputation out of
fascinated
this
and
text.
perplexed by Peter. But that's part of exactly why I want to trace this. Like, he is the one who draws his sword.
Yeah.
He is the one who follows Jesus to this next dangerous locale.
That's right.
And then other stuff happens.
Yeah. It adds your line of thinking adds some complexity to this character that I think is really important.
What does it tell you, if anything, that one of the disciples, the unnamed disciple, was known to the high priest?
That's such an interesting detail. We're not clear who the other disciple is. That the disciple knows the high priest, I don't know what to do with that. It gives him an easy in into the courtyard that Peter does not have.
Yeah.
But what you make of the connections, I'm not sure. I'm not. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know either. I mean, presumably he was not just known but trusted.
Right.
He is known but not known to be a disciple, or why would they let him in? I guess. But then when the woman at the gate asks Peter, she says, "Are you also a disciple?"
Yeah. Now, it seems to me that they know that the other disciple is Jesus' disciple.
Okay, so they know they're letting in disciples.
I think it's not I don't think it's necessary to read the text that way, but I think the text, he went with Jesus. She says, "Are you also a disciple?" I think they know.
Yeah.
So the high priest knows that the other disciple is Jesus' follower, and yet he doesn't seem to be in any danger in this text.
Yeah.
Which I think raises an interest. I mean, I don't know where we're going to come out with this, but, we've got one disciple who is known from the beginning, is not in any danger. Peter, who is not known, is going to deny Jesus here and then again a couple of times because he perceives exactly that he is in danger.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know if you then ask about whether Peter is not actually in danger, but is just imagining it because he's intimidated by the state apparatus, or whether you would suggest that Peter actually is in danger because he doesn't have an inside connection that's going to keep him safe.
Yeah, maybe because he's not known.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess that leads me directly into the next question that comes to my mind, which is, okay, so Peter tells the woman at the gate, "I am not a disciple." I don't know how we would know this, but the question I have is, what do you think was in his heart? And when I first read it, I thought, well, maybe he's being practical.
Yeah.
And thinking, this woman's not going to let me in if I say I'm a disciple, and I need to be in there because that's, where my teacher is. And, and Peter has already demonstrated a willingness to, take on battles with Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be that. It could be fear. It could be, I can't tell. It just seems like such a quick pivot from I'm going to follow you to this other location, and then I'm going to immediately deny you. Yeah.
No, I love that question, Amy, and you're making me think about this text differently than I think I've got a little bit of a simplified reading of this text, maybe based on the other Gospels. My tendency is to read it as, at the last moment, Peter lost his nerve.
Yeah.
He's very brave in the garden when he's in Jesus's place with Jesus.
Yeah.
He's willing to use the aggressiveness of a sword in order to protect Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But then here at the courtyard gate, it's not that. It's, are you willing to be vulnerable and risk your life in order to be with Jesus? And his answer is, I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to read it as he's willing to be aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
He's not willing to really be a follower. And so in the process, he denies his discipleship, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. There's
yeah.
other ways one could read it. If you play it out the other way, does it go anywhere?
I mean, the other way, the road gets blocked a little bit, as you pointed out, that it does seem like the folks inside know that the other disciple is a disciple. So, I mean, I guess I don't, and again, like, I don't know what Peter knows about all this.
Yeah.
If you play it out the other way, it could be that, at least for this denial, that Peter is trying to follow Jesus and be where Jesus is. And the quickest way to do that in his mind is to try to be friendly with this woman who is at the gate, and that involves deception. Mm-hmm. It stands very starkly to Jesus, so openly, like, stepping forward in the garden and just saying, I am,
Yeah.
and here I am not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, in the garden, as you were pointing out, when Jesus lets the disciples go,
mm-hmm.
says, don't let them come with me, don't take them. It's because he doesn't want to lose any of the ones who've been given to him.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment that Peter says, I am not, Jesus lost him. Now, it turns out to be temporary, but not until the very end of the gospel. They're going to kind of get themselves back together post-resurrection. And so, I mean, whichever way you read Peter's motivations, the result is Jesus lost him. He denied Jesus, or actually he doesn't deny Jesus here.
Yeah.
He doesn't say he doesn't know him. He just says he's not his disciple. He denies his own discipleship.
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense of what the Gospel of John means, I think, by discipleship as being a relationship, he's been lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you think back to the garden and you say, well, why did Jesus not want him to come along? And one way of getting at it is to say, these pressures of operating within the system, they're going to be too much for you. Yeah, you're going to end up denying me. You're going to end up getting lost, even though you were trying to stay with me
right.
more than the others did. You're going to end up getting lost.
Right.
Whatever the motivation was, it was
really
too much for you to handle.
Yeah.
But then the message becomes something like, when things get real, you should just stay away. Which I don't love that theology or whatever, but
yeah, I mean, it's a protective thing to stay away, because you know you can't handle whatever's going to happen.
Yeah.
Or Jesus knows you can't.
Yeah.
And then there's this detail about warming themselves by the fire, which is just so poignant to me. Like, when I first read it, my first thought honestly was like, is it that cold in Israel this time of year? But then I was like thinking back and I was like, yeah, it can be.
Yeah.
Chilly. But this image of the, police and soldiers standing around the fire, and then Peter choosing to stand by the fire with them, it just aligned so well with that image you described in the garden of Jesus.
Yes.
Of Judas standing with the one side and Jesus and the disciples with the other.
Amy, that's really lovely. And I think that's exactly right. So you get this kind of embodied portrayal of the denial. Peter has chosen to stand with these folks who are not Jesus around a fire, which is light, and warmth, which is temporary.
Yeah.
Where Jesus, is the light that came into the world, and Peter is choosing this sort of earthly, temporary thing over and against. Yeah. And it was beautifully sort of symbolized in that positioning.
Yeah. Yeah. He chooses the creature comforts. I don't want to be cold.
Yeah.
I don't want to be cold. But but as you said, I'm willing to do this grand gesture and take out my sword and cut off the ear of a slave. But then when I'm cold, I'm just going to stand by the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really, Peter's been a really interesting sort of mirror for me to hold up to myself and be like, in what ways do I do this?
Do you want to talk about that?
I mean, I was thinking about like, what are the grand gestures that I may have been involved in related to some issue of social justice or advocacy in the world that yet haven't trickled down to my everyday comforts, like where I choose to spend my money, or, in what environments will I speak out against something. Like it's sometimes easier to speak from a stage to a big crowd, but when you're in a small social group, are you gonna say the thing? Are you ready to say the thing? Have you gotten there yet? I guess this is sort of how I'm reading Peter when it comes down to it. He's not there yet.
I love that, Amy. And I think that is a really, really helpful way to read Peter, as a mirror on humankind, which includes you, the reader, and the question, like, we all should be asking that exact question. And it is interesting that Peter fails in both ways, right? When he feels safe, he becomes aggressive and violent. And Jesus says, no, that's not it. And then when he's vulnerable in somebody else's space, he becomes afraid and denies who he really is, or who he really follows. And, I see both of those things. Like, I either overreact, like I can be angry, or I can be scared.
Yeah.
Those two things often go together.
Right. Yeah. And they both are ways in some way of, I guess, seeking control of the situation. Mm-hmm. Like you try to control it with violence or anger, or you try to control it. But just as you said at the beginning, it's the vulnerability that is required from this moment. He's just not, he's not up for that.
Yeah. And both of those things in this text they're not exactly both denials of Jesus, but they are both ways of not following, not being disciples of Jesus. This is not what Jesus desired, seemingly in either case. Mm-hmm. He would rather have Peter have stayed away.
Right. That was his suggestion. Yeah.
Hello, fellow Bible worms. My name is Amy Marie Epp. I'm a pastor at Seattle Mennonite Church in Seattle, Washington. I support BibleWorm at the early worm level, $8 a month, and I consider that professional budget dollars very well spent. What I especially love about being a patron at this level is having access to those podcast episodes a week early, since I'm often working that far ahead on sermons or on worship prep. Also, by the way, I love the sticker, which I put on my water bottle immediately. Amy and Bobby's insight and wisdom have become an invaluable resource for me. I look forward every week to hearing them chew through that biblical text together with curiosity and with humor. It feels like I'm a part of the conversation. That's why I wanted to support them in making BibleWorm possible. It still feels like a gift each week to have that Patreon episode land in my inbox. I hope all of you who are listening will also consider becoming patrons. And now, back to this week's episode.
Okay. Anything else you want to comment on from this section?
I don't think so.
All righty. Then we'll pick up in verse 19. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus on the face, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered, If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay. So, I'm just going to be real with you, Bobby.
Okay, yeah. Real. I love it when you're real.
Jesus' answer to this question reads to me as a little coy.
Yeah.
Like, this is the same man who, stepped forward so boldly, as we were just saying, and says, I'm the one you're looking for. Uh-huh. He's not hiding who he is. Mm-mm. Why why doesn't he doesn't answer their question, really.
He doesn't.
Why? Lama lo, why not?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think that's the right question. And I think it's the question that John is sort of inviting us to ask. Here's my effort.
Mm-hmm.
This is the last night of Jesus' life. Tomorrow night, if somebody asks this question, Jesus can't answer it because he's no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody has to be able to testify to Jesus. And Jesus has been telling people who he is for 3 years. People have heard. They've listened to him. They ought to be able to say what Jesus has said about himself. So on the one hand, he doesn't deny the essence of it, right? I am.
Mm-hmm.
But the details, somebody else is going to have to handle the details. Now, I don't know that satisfies the whole question, but that's kind of where I start out. Where do you go with it?
I like your answer a lot, and I had not thought about it in the context of like Jesus cannot be the only holder of this information or the go-to person to get this from, for much longer. We need to start transitioning that now. I read it also, and I suspect part of this was in the farewell speech that we didn't read. So, So given that, I know that along the way, reading the Gospels, often, it will say Jesus then went off and spoke to the disciple, and the disciple was amazed and became a follower. But it doesn't. There's no elevator speech here. There are no like bullet points to say, well, here were my teachings in summary for you. Like they are complex and sort of interwoven and distributed over time into many different people's ears. And we've talked too, I think, about the importance of different people holding different pieces of this. So in some ways it would run not quite counter purpose, but to try to give all the information, especially to this, this audience. I don't know. We've said that the information maybe is intentionally shared among people. So maybe there's some of that in there too.
I do think it's interesting that Jesus says in verse 20, I've said nothing in private in the CEB.
That's not true.
I know we just had, chapters 13 to 17, 5 chapters out of the Gospel of John where Jesus talking to his inner circle in private.
Yeah.
And some of his most important teachings are in there. So like, I don't know, Jesus.
Yeah. But you can get the gist from the public teachings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've also talked along the way, Amy, about the sort of contrast between the official holders of power and interpretation even versus the populist, the people, and how, we've seen this tension in the way that these two groups kind of interact with each other around Jesus. And in one sense, this is just another instance of that, where Jesus is sort of saying, well, I can't explain to you who I am. You need to go down to where the people are.
Yeah.
And you need to pay attention to what the people are saying.
Yeah.
But you're not going to do that because you're a person of power
who
doesn't go amongst the people. So this could, in a sense, be a critique of people in positions of power in that way.
That's really interesting. And the ways in which, when all the information is distributed among the people, it's sort of like you can have one person that you sort of, I don't know if it's really fair to call Jesus a scapegoat in this environment because Jesus is is the one, like legitimately is the one. But you can get rid of one person, but if it's the whole people who are, sharing and testifying to this, then it could really be more of a threat to power structures.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting.
The other thing that occurs to me is, in this trial is going to result in Jesus's death. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And he's not giving them any, it's like, do you take the stand in your own defense? Because the prosecutor's going to figure out a way to manipulate what you say about yourself, or at least this is the idea.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is just withholding because he doesn't want to give them any reason that they could even use to crucify him for, like, he wants it all to be on them. Like, they decided to do it because they thought he was dangerous, despite the fact that they didn't have any evidence. You look unconvinced.
Well, no, it's not that I'm unconvinced, because that was like, part of my thinking as I was reading it too. But then I'm thinking back to when Peter drew his sword and he was like, no, this has to happen.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that goes back to my sort of ongoing wrestling and tension with, like, what does it mean that it had to happen? And when we reflect back on it, how does, to be honest, blame come into the picture, as a community that is often blamed for this outcome? Why wouldn't Jesus just say whatever's true that's going to piss them off?
And I like the crucial question in there is, what is the this in that sentence that is the this that has to happen? Is it the fact of Jesus' death? Like, I need to die, and like by hook or crook, like whatever I have to do to get them to kill me? Or is the this that Jesus needs to be killed by the power structures who have no evidence that he's actually done anything that he deserves to be killed for? I tend to read it that second way. It's not simply the fact of Jesus' death, but the manner of his death. The reason he's being put to death is because he raised Lazarus from the dead, according to the Gospel of John. So this one who brings life into the world in the midst of an empire that functions by wielding death, he's dangerous. But they can't say that, right? We can't say we're going to kill this guy because he can bring life. They have to say something else. And so he's saying, I'm not going to give you anything else to say. You're going to have to kill me, knowing what you know, for contrived reasons. And that's this. Like, Jesus' death is going to expose that that's the way the world works. And if he said who he is, and they'd use that as a reason to kill him, or not even who he is, but, if he makes some claim that is clearly blasphemous. Right. Although he has said, I am, which is pretty
but that's,
that
sort of,
it
just comes right up to the line, but is a little ambiguous.
Yeah. I kind of want to let that one float in the possibilities of Jesus needs them to.
I think that's really interesting, and I think and so I kind of need to see how the rest of the trial goes in John to see.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
See how it plays out and what excuse they do wind up using.
Yeah.
God, the world is just a hot mess, Bobby.
Yeah, you're not kidding about that.
Yeah, that's my summary. Okay, the world's a hot mess.
Yeah. I will say one of the odd things about recording BibleWorm is that we do record in advance. And so you never quite know what's going to be happening in the world by the time the episode comes out.
Yeah.
And yet, it is almost always true that even if something different is going on in the world, by the time the episode comes out, it is very much of a part of whatever was going on when we record.
Yeah.
And it's very much a piece of what was happening, in the Roman Empire in this text. And so there is a sense here of the ways that human beings are and the ways that power structures work that is perennial. That whatever the moment we're in, these issues seem to be consistent issues.
Yeah. Yes. And that's been a challenging thing for us as we've tried to release episodes earlier, because people want them earlier so they can prepare, which all makes good sense. But in the early days, we used to comment a little bit more about what was going on in the news, and now we don't, because we don't know if it'll make sense.
Yeah.
However, I trust the world will still be heavy with violence and power.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me that the guard takes offense at Jesus. How can you speak to the high priest that way and slaps him? What? How do you read that character?
That's such an interesting question. I love that you pointed out that it's the guard, which, the text says, but I hadn't really, alighted upon that particular detail. Do you see any parallel between now? Well, okay, I'll just ask. Do you see any parallel between him doing this and Peter responding to the perceived threat against Jesus with the sword? Like, we
that's so
protect our
interesting.
leader.
Yeah. I haven't ever thought about that connection, but I love that connection. Can you press that?
I mean, when I read the text earlier without thinking about the Peter piece, it just read sort of as, man, we are attached to our power structures wherever we are in the
Yeah.
power structure, even the
Yeah.
people who are not on top.
Yeah.
It organizes our universe in a way
Yeah.
that it's so scary to think about that organization falling apart, even if you're in a crappy place in the
Yeah.
lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And so the attachment of the guard to, the idea that you have to be totally deferential to the high priest, I don't know, just seems to underscore that. When you put it together with Peter, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is just that Jesus immediately says no.
Yeah.
Like that is the natural inclination of people living in this society and living in most societies. But by virtue of being a disciple of Jesus, it's not clear to you that that's not what we're supposed to be doing. Although, I don't know. I mean, I think there are other cases where I think Jesus would want people to stand up for his honor. So
It's an interesting, I mean, it gets really complicated really fast, but I love, love that sort of trajectory that you've opened up there. And, you were talking last couple of episodes, I can't remember exactly when, about the Calva Homer, if this is so, how much more so?
Yeah.
And, there's one of those kind of at work here, that this guard is defending merely that honor. Like, how dare you, insult him with this cagey answer?
Right.
But Jesus has said no when his actual life is in danger.
Yeah.
And so if Jesus is going to not allow you to stand up for his honor that way, then how much more so is it ridiculous to be slapping people?
Right.
The other thing that you've made me think about is, the last text that we read was Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And what we talked about in that text was Jesus is upending the social order.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that people that you think deserve honor, it's not on you to pay honor to people because they are more important than you, right? It's on honorable people to lower themselves into the position of servants for people that are less important than them. He flipped it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love what you said about how hard that is for human beings at all levels of the social structure, because it makes you, once you start flipping those structures, the structure falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And the structure works to, if the alternative to structure is no structure, people often will prefer the structure, even if it doesn't exactly work for them. Because the alternative is too scary. I think that's really lovely. I think there's something really important there.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think to the story of the Exodus and how the Israelites in the desert, after a couple of days, they're like, let's just go back to Egypt.
Yeah.
At least we knew the deal. We knew what to expect. We knew what the system was. We knew some small ways to manipulate the system in our favor. Now we just have no idea, and we're out here floating and totally vulnerable.
Yeah, that text we read way back at the beginning of the season in Exodus 16, I think that connects exactly to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I love that connection.
The other thing about that Calva Homer that it has me thinking about, that sort of, if this is so, all the more so, this other thing is so, is, of course, that the high priest is supposed to be the point of connection between Israel and God.
Yeah.
And they've got God in the room here.
Yeah.
Which, of course, they don't know, but it makes the whole thing seem so silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And, in the logic of the Gospel of John, Jesus has told them that, right? He has said, I am, which we've talked about has important resonances with Exodus 3. And so in some ways, if you know that detail, if you don't, if you know that detail, you know everything else. But if you don't believe that detail, you're not going to believe anything else either. So I think that may be at work here too. You haven't believed it when I said who I am. So why do I need to tell you what I've said?
Right. And it just, as you're saying, if you're not aware of those other things, or you haven't been paying attention to them, or haven't been tuned into them in the same way that, we have been over the course of these conversations, if I just read this text as I started out by saying, like, I see why they didn't like Jesus's answer.
Yeah.
Like, this is, if a child spoke to a parent this way, this is what you'd say, like, you're asking for it.
Yeah.
Like you're talking back. Answer my question. But yeah, with all the other context in there, it just pulls apart that impulse to respond to questioning in that way. So interesting. All right. Shall I take us to the end?
Yes.
Okay. So picking up then in verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of the disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again Peter denied it, and at that moment the cock crowed. That detail, "at that moment the cock crowed," is so like rich in a sensory way, and you can sort of picture what time of day it is, and it's also it's a little bit of a weird detail. Again, unless it's John just saying it was 2:00 when that happened.
Yeah.
Is there more to this for John?
It's so fascinating, Amy, what John is doing here. In the other Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, the prediction that Peter's going to deny Jesus comes really close to Peter's actual denial of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
In the Gospel of John, the prediction that Peter's going to deny Jesus before the cock crows comes at the end of chapter 13, right after the washing of the feet, in verses 36 to 38. Peter says, "Where are you going?" Jesus says, "You can't follow me where I'm going, but you will follow me later." Peter says, "Why can't I follow now? I'll give my life for you." Jesus says, "Will you give up your life for me? I assure you that you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows."
Mm.
So when the rooster crows right here, John, the gospel writer, is clearly trying to get us to think all the way back to this conversation in 13, which we might have had in mind up until now. But if we didn't have it in mind, and we don't have it in mind because we didn't read that text in the narrative lectionary. But if you're like reading through the gospel or listening through the Gospel of John, you would be like, oh my gosh. And then that passage becomes some kind of key. I don't know if it's key, but it's at least needs to be in the room when we're interpreting what's happening here. So Peter has said, "I would even give up my life for you." And Jesus says, "You'll deny me 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then now here it is. But it's been, chronologically, like it's only been a few hours, but in the Gospel of John, it's been, 5 chapters, which is a huge amount of text.
Yeah. Peter, man. So, Bobby, I am trying, as you know well I like to do, to read as empathetically as I can to Peter.
Yeah.
And I got him through the gate that way.
Yeah.
I even was sort of like, well, he was cold and sort of lost track of anything other than the immediate needs of his body, so he's standing around the fire. I don't know what he has heard or not heard of this whole conversation that they're having.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's getting a little harder for him to be standing in the space with Jesus and hear this going down. He's still warming himself and twice saying, "No, that wasn't me." Even with the detail of, basically we saw you. We saw you in the garden. No, you didn't.
And it was a relative of the servant whose ear Peter had cut off. And so like that to me ratchets up like, hey, aren't you that guy that chopped off my cousin's ear? Right?
Yeah.
So now not only are you a follower of Jesus, but you're a violent follower of Jesus. And that would certainly, like it's not exactly a threat, but like you can see now how that could be a dangerous thing to have to acknowledge.
Yeah. So do you think it's at this moment that it's fear? fear, or some combination of fear and like comfort, for lack of a better word. Like he's comfortable. He's in a space that is maybe familiar to him.
Yeah.
He's standing around the fire. He sees he can be in this club.
Yeah.
He's taken away from the other disciples. I don't know.
I think it's all of those things, Amy. Like, I mean, this is one of the beautiful things about narrative, right? Is all of
Yeah.
those things are kind of in play in this conversation, and we can think about like, in what ways is that true? Like, what is it about human nature
Yeah.
that would make you deny Jesus in this exact moment? I'm coming back because it comes right after that detail. I want to read this through John 13, which we were just talking about. There, Jesus says, "You can't follow me now, but you will follow later." Peter says, "I'd give up my life for you." And Jesus says, "No, you won't."
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the way that I read that. Like "you can follow me later." Like that actually is going to happen in the Gospel of John. But the question is, well, what's different later? To which I think the answer is on the other side, on Peter's side of the resurrection, you can't follow because death is the end, right? As far as you know, Peter, the end of this story is death. For me, for you, you can't handle it.
Yeah.
And so don't follow me because you're not going to be able to, like, people cannot deal with death. Then I think what he's saying is, on the other side of the resurrection, when death has lost its sting, now you'll be able to follow me. But you can't right now. So I think Peter just gets scared here. He's scared of what's about to happen to Jesus. He's scared. He's protecting his own life because he thinks in these terms of when you die, you're dead.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the information yet, at least in any direct way, that in fact there is life on the other side of death. Although maybe he should have gotten that from what Jesus did with Lazarus. And so I think it's just like when you believe that death is the final moment, death is all there is, you cannot handle it. You'll either become violent like you did in the garden, or you will deny who you are like you're doing here.
Yeah.
Death is too much.
So should we hold Peter accountable for that? Like, should we blame, for lack of a better word, Peter for it?
That's such an interesting question, Amy, because I mean, a more pointed way of asking that question would be, I don't know if I'm allowed to ask this question.
Go ahead.
What's the difference between Peter and Judas? Judas denied Jesus. Judas led them to the garden, which maybe, like, he sort of
It seems
betrayed
like Judas
Jesus in that
turned
way.
him in. No?
Yeah, in this gospel, Judas doesn't take any payment or any bribe or anything like that, but he does bring the guards to the garden.
Yeah. A little more he's like active instead of a little more passive.
Yeah.
Like Peter is.
I mean, I think Peter's denial of Jesus here is pretty complete. 3 times he said, "I'm not his follower." And so in that framing of this
he's
gospel,
abandoned Jesus at this point.
and when you think about that good shepherd text that we talked about, and who do you let lead you out?
Yeah.
Peter is with some other flock of sheep at this point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's just the way that is. One of the things, and I think Peter's fully culpable for that.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about this gospel is that at the end, in the post-resurrection encounter, Peter gets a second chance.
Yeah.
And so there's this sense of which, the way the story plays out in the end is, even if you deny me because you did not understand your own human nature, I'm still going to come back and find you again.
Yeah.
We don't get that detail right here. Like we have to wait for several chapters before we figure that out.
Yeah.
So right now we're just sitting with even Peter, who was the brave one, who pulled out his sword, who followed when he could have left. He betrayed Jesus. And then I think we're all thinking like, so what could we do? In what ways might we abandon the things that Jesus in the case of Christians, or the things that we care about?
Right. I know you can't answer this question, but I'm so curious about what happened to the other disciple in there.
Yeah.
It just doesn't tell us anything.
That's right. Now, I think that's an interesting thing to think about.
Especially as a potential model for Peter.
Mm-hmm. If you got connections.
Yeah, that's true.
You
Maybe
should
it's
be
less
fine.
scary.
I don't know what to do with that. Like, I think that's an interesting observation that this disciple seems to have no trouble because he's known.
Yeah.
So your connections will protect you. I mean, I think that's true.
Yeah.
But what you do with that, theologically, is not as clear.
Right, but it still is this like worldly sense of protection. Like in some ways, I wouldn't say he's no better, but like it's still relying on the power structures of the world that Jesus is trying to overturn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure John is really wanting us to think about that,
Yeah.
It just sort of lets that detail drop. But
Yeah, no,
some of
he
the most
lets it
interesting
drop.
things to think about are the things that, the gospel's not really trying to point us to, but are nonetheless there.
Nonetheless, you can ask any question. Why not? Okay, so we have reached the end of today's reading.
Yeah.
Stepping back a bit from it, what would you pull out for our listeners?
I'm really struck by where you started this out, which is that Peter in this text is sort of holding up a mirror to us and saying, what is our nature? What are we going to do when the moment comes? And, I was in a Sunday school class a long, long time ago with this super confident guy who was like, if I had been with Jesus in the garden, I wouldn't have denied him. And I was like, I think the whole point is you don't know what you would do.
Right.
Peter has said, I'd give up my life for you. He has tried to protect Jesus with a sword. He's followed Jesus into the heart of the imperial system. And he ended up denying. He didn't know. So part of this text, I think, is a warning about being overconfident in our own capacity to follow.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, what I think this text is applauding, is this right? Is the disciples who just left when Jesus told them to leave.
I think they chose the better path of the available options. It's making me think back to the early text where Jesus's mother tells the servants, like, do whatever he says, even not necessarily knowing what he's going to say.
Yeah.
And if we want to think sort of along the lines you're suggesting, it is sort of it's hubris to think that you're going to be able to do this thing that Jesus has told you you're not going to be able to do. It's hubris. So you have to let it go. But yeah, I think it's a tricky message because you're right. It could go the other way.
I think the way that I sort of make sense out of that for myself is reading back through the end of chapter 13. You can't follow me now, but you will follow me later.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of talk in this gospel about knowing what time it is.
Yeah.
Jesus says, it's not my time. It's not my time. Now it's my time. Yeah. Jesus says, it's not your time.
Yeah.
It'll be your time later.
Yeah.
And so there's something in here, I think, about know what time it is.
Mm-hmm.
And do things not because you think it's what you can do, but do things because it is the time to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your point about hubris, I think your point about resorting to violence, I don't know if you made that point, but resorting to violence is kind of human nature. Getting scared in the face of death is kind of human nature.
Yeah.
And so you can't trust yourself in these situations. What can you trust? You can trust what Jesus has said to you. And you can trust, by the end of the Gospel of John, which has not happened yet, you can trust the good news of the resurrection, that death, which is the thing you are so afraid of, that's going to make you do the things that you cannot do, or you don't want to do, or Jesus doesn't want you to do anyway. Once you have really believed the good news of the resurrection, then you can do things that you can't do when you're afraid of the deathly powers of the empire.
Yeah.
So then I think there's some message there about we, whoever, need to make sure that you truly, truly believe the good news of the resurrection on which everything else depends before you try to follow Jesus in this path.
That sits in such a lovely way with the sort of reflective nature of the way you've talked about Lent and knowing the darkness of the world and also knowing like really taking a look at yourself and, where you are in your spiritual maturity and being honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that. Know what time it is.
When you read this text and think about its connection to contemporary life, where do you come out?
It's thinking about Peter is making me think of this very famous, maybe the most famous Jewish prayer called Kol Nidre that we chant the night before Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year. And the words of the prayer, or the purpose of the prayer, is basically asking to be released from the vows that we were not able to keep.
Mm.
And when I was younger, I used to think like, well, what the heck kind of prayer is that? And it has by anti-Semitic folk been thrown in the face of the Jewish community. Look, they just pray once a year. Oh, now let me out of all the vows I didn't keep. It's like your get out of jail free card. But it is the most mournful, haunting melody. And as I get older, I realize all the situations where I do in good faith promise to do things that I fully believe I will and can do. And there are reasons sometimes that have to do with me or that have to do with other things I can't control that I can't or I don't. And it's gut-wrenching. It should be gut-wrenching. And it's true.
Yeah. And
I love what you were saying about, after the resurrection, that Peter gets another chance. This is a thing that people do.
Yeah.
In good faith.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, I think, been helpful for me to see that seemingly strange behavior of Peter here and try to think let's assume he's not a psychopath and find a different reading of this.
Yeah.
And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that I do things like this.
Yeah. I really love that connection, Amy. And, connecting what happens here at the end of this gospel with the prayer, Kol Nidre, Yom Kippur. I think that's such a rich connection that all the way through this tradition that manifests itself in Jewish faith and in Christian faith, there is this sense that God, in one way or another, knows that at the end of the day, we are human beings who are not ultimately reliable. And there are ways of sorting that out.
Yeah.
So God sort of fills the gap where we're not capable. And I think the wrenchingness of this narrative and the wrenchingness of the prayer that you're describing, I think that's the important connection.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle. It can't just be oh, well, it has to hurt. It has to hurt you a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we see ourselves in Peter, in what ways am I like Peter? That's one way kind of narratively of placing ourselves in that conversation.
Yeah. So I think I'll be thinking about this text in Peter for a while.
Yeah.
Oh,
Next
okay.
week we get to see what happens when Jesus moves from the high priest to the Roman prefect. So we've seen the sort of Jewish trial of Jesus, and now we'll see the Roman trial of Jesus.
Yes. Yep.
In John, where are we? 18:28 to 40 next week.
Yes, and I am going to endeavor not to call Pilate Pilate, as I think I did the first.
That was one of my favorite moments in BibleWorm. Pilate. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not unreasonable.
The centaur was the guy with horse legs. No, it's the centurion.
The centurion. You're like, is that the guy with horse legs?
Yeah. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, there have been some entertaining moments. For sure.
Oh, it is always a pleasure to talk with you, Bobby. I will see you next time.
All right, Amy. See you then.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced by Bobby Williamson and edited by Joel and Laura Becker. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby. We're grateful to our many supporters for helping us keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois, and to our newest supporters, Suzanne Gorau, Nathan Williams, and Jim Yao.
Join us again next time as we continue in John chapter 18 with verses 28 through 40. Until then, keep on digging.